For me, it began in 1992 with an ending. I was 5 years old and happened upon a comic shop advertising the death of Superman in its window display. From that moment forward, the Man of Steel has been my favorite character, and now, on this podcast, I'm exploring my fandom and examining the creative visions that have shaped the last son of Krypton across media for over 80 years. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This episode is called Justice for ZACK SNYDER'S Superman. We're going to be speaking about Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. And I'm very excited to welcome my guest, our first returning guest, actually. He was on the premiere, and he's back again now, comic book artist V Ken Marion. Welcome.
Hey, what's up, Anthony? How's it going? Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. I'm so glad that you were excited to do this episode. And that's actually kind of where I want to start, because I'm curious, as a fellow Zack Snyder fan, what has the experience been as someone who has enjoyed his take on the characters? Because I feel like that's not something that's always shared. Obviously, there are the devoted, group, but I know there are a lot of others who don't feel the same way. So, is your fandom something that you share proudly, or is it something that you've kind of kept a little bit on the quiet side?
Yeah, I've let people know, like, when we talk about these movies, like, I feel like I'm always standing up for Zack Snyder and, the different, like the different movies that came out, and, Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, and even Justice League to a certain degree. But as time's gone on, I've kind of liked that one a little bit less and less, But yeah, I've pretty much not shied away from it. I don't understand why. I mean, I do understand why they're controversial, but at the same degree, I kind of don't, especially after just rewatching the movies. So it'll be interesting to dive into this.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I know you texted me a couple of times when you were in the process of your rewatch. You texted me, I think, during Man of Steel, and you said you had a lot of thoughts. And I know you texted me at some point in the Batman v Superman process, because I know that one you had to split up, right? Because we're talking about the Ultimate Edition here, 3 hours.
Yeah. Movies are long, man. That if I was gonna say, I don't think either of them they're far from perfect, right? But I think my biggest, I guess, gripe, if that's a word to use, is that I think they're just a little too long. And I think that with Justice League coming out being the 4 hours, but they're going to be like hour-long installments. Did you hear about that?
Yes.
The Snyder Cut's going to be 4 episodes. I think that's going to work in its favor a lot, because, I think he's got a lot of story that he wants to tell, but just watching it in one go like that, it's kind of tough. So yeah, Batman vs Superman was a multi-watching experience for me, multi-sitting.
So I hear you. I actually did it in one sitting, but it was a lot. I mean, it's a dense movie. It's a lot of movie. But I really did enjoy it. And honestly, the rewatch experience for both was really interesting. And I guess that would be one of my first questions for you too. I mean, there's a lot that we'll unpack, but just big picture, what was the overall gut response to rewatching these two movies for you?
Okay, so the overall gut response, it's kind of deep. So it's not like a surface level kind of analysis of it, but the gut response was that I think Zack Snyder is like an artist, you know what I mean? Like a true artist, and that those movies are art. And I think one of the reasons why they are divisive is because I don't think a lot of people go into superhero movies looking for an artistic vision take on the character, right? But that was my big takeaway from it, was that I think that he was doing something like a very personal artistic statement that a lot of people just didn't jive with his take, So, yeah, that's where I came down from it. But but overall I liked him. I thought Man of Steel had some weird editing in it. But we'll talk about that later when we get more into it. But overall I like the take on his take on Superman, and I like Christopher Reeve's take, or Henry Cavill's take on Superman. And I think that they're not as dark and depressing as people try to make them out to be. I think that there is a lot more classic comic bookness in there, and we'll talk about that later too. But I think they are very, very true to the comic books in a lot of ways, actually. So
I'm with you, and I'll say right at the top here that, again, I know that these movies were controversial. We can talk about the first time that we experienced these movies, because I can share that, my reaction to both movies the first time I saw each of them was a little bit mixed. It didn't quite line up to the expectations that I had. And I think that was true for a lot of people. If anyone's out there saying, listen, these movies are just not for me, I just don't like this take on the character, that's fine. Like, I'm not necessarily here, to try to, change anyone's mind, right? Like, not everyone is going to like everything. So, if these
Agreed.
movies just aren't your cup of tea, that's perfectly fine. But sort of my thesis, I guess, for this episode, as we discuss here, is that I genuinely feel that what Snyder did was a valid take on the character. It's not the same as what Richard Donner and Christopher Reeve did. And I'm not saying it's better or worse. They're just different. And I feel like there's room for both. And so with Snyder here, we have someone who positioned Clark and the rest of these characters in, quote unquote, the real world, in a more grounded setting in modern times. And, so much of the movie, of course, hinges on Clark's relationship with the world. What is he going to be to the world, for the world, and how is the world going to receive him and view him? And I feel like that's a perfectly valid take. And if that's the take, if you are setting the story in this more grounded, more real world setting, then I do really feel very strongly that the choices that he made and the journey that he took Clark on were the appropriate choices, that it tracked. So again, like I said, if people just don't dig the take, like, that's fine, and I get that. But I think it is a valid take. I think there's room for both. And I think that, again, the choices that he made were right. And there were a lot of interesting choices, too. And there was a lot of stuff that I don't know that I fully either picked up on or fully appreciated the first time or two that I watched the movie. But there was stuff that, as I was watching this time, that like really hit home for me.
Dude, I agree 100%. And I got this vibe when I was watching it, not so much with Man of Steel, but definitely with Batman versus Superman, that it felt to me very much like line for line, dialogue for dialogue, beat for beat. I could have seen that as an arc in like a Superman Batman comic book. You know what I mean? Like, it felt, and I don't think like I would have had a problem with it. Like, it felt very much like a story that could have been in the comic books, like by like Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness, right? Like, to me, like, it felt like a comic like that was a story that was not like holding to the status quo, right? Like, how when we read story arcs in comics, they're always putting the characters through different situations and different paces, right? But then when we go to movies, the expectation is almost that like they're the status quo, Spider-Man like is in high school and he meets Mary Jane, like, you know what I mean? It's like kind of like the overall trope is what people expect. And Batman versus Superman in particular felt very much like a totally valid, legit story arc from a comic book, but wasn't adhering to like the status quos of what those characters are. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It felt very similar to me. It's like the Superman books I was reading in the early 2000s, like the For Tomorrow, the Brian Azzarello one, or like that McGuinness, Jeff Loeb stuff. So, So on one hand, like, I don't really understand why people butted up against it so much, especially comic fans. But on the second hand, like, where like, quote unquote, like, not like the normal people that don't like comics, just like the average people going to the theater, like, I get why they bristled up against it, because it didn't hold true to those like status quo kind of like things, or like archetypes, I guess. It wasn't like Superman here, he just saves the day and that's it. Like, they definitely brought in more of the, like you said, the real world and more nuance to the plot. Like, it's very plot driven.
I agree with that, especially as far as it being plot driven. Definitely Batman v Superman. Like, there's a lot of plot there. And again, even more so in the Ultimate Edition. Man of Steel, I felt like had some more room to breathe, and you got to, follow Clark on his journey more. Again, Batman v Superman really had an awful lot of, of ground to cover. But, mm-hmm. To your point, and you had hit on this earlier too, that even though, yes, this was a different take on the character, especially compared, obviously, to what we had seen on screen before. But I agree with you that it 100%, to me at least, still maintained the essence of the character. And it's funny to me, too. as far as just this whole idea of doing something different. And this doesn't have to do with, I'm not even comparing it to the comics, but what was the prior Superman movie that we had? Superman Returns, right? I don't know what's going on in White Plains over there.
Yeah.
It's quite all, that's quite
We're
all
high
right.
up too. We're high up, so I don't know how you can hear that, but
But so with Superman Returns, right? We had an instance, and I'm going to cover Superman Returns on the podcast down the line because I'm curious to kind of give that a second look after all this time. But with Superman Returns, you had a director who crafted a movie that was so beholden to the Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve vision of the character. I mean, the same music cues. They found, unused footage of Marlon Brando, Brandon Routh, who I love, but that was a performance that was very much in the vein of what Christopher Reeve had done. It was a movie where,
I actually don't think it was. Like,
no,
because remember we talked before about how like Christopher Reeve had this kind of like cool swagger to him. Brandon Routh didn't have any of that, and I don't think it's him because he's really good on other stuff I've seen. I think it was the direction they were giving him was this very somber. Like, I actually don't think that movie, like, tonally adheres to the Christopher Reeve. Like, visually, they definitely were trying for that, but tonally, it feels so different to me. Like,
okay, that's
fair.
For a
different show. That's for a different show.
That is, no, you know what though? That is a good point. I do agree with that, especially as far as tone for sure. But yeah, and then so anyway, that was those were some of the things that, fans cited and, criticizing it, that it was, again, so close to this other version, but didn't really do enough of its own thing. There was a real lack of action in that movie, right? Famously, Superman like never throws a punch, right? Then you have Man of Steel where, Snyder like created a whole different visual aesthetic for for Krypton, for Superman, for the costume, for the powers. That Hans Zimmer, soundtrack, gorgeous. It's extremely action packed, and people complained about that, like, oh, it was too violent. The battle for Metropolis was too destructive. So it's the sort of thing. It's like, I guess fans would argue, well, there's a middle ground somewhere to be found, but I don't know. I would kind of counter and say that at least Snyder had a vision and he tried something different and tried to offer something new.
Okay, the action at the end is like the best part of the movie for Man of Steel for me. Like, so I think Man of Steel is like 85% almost perfect movie, if that makes sense. Like, I've got like, I don't know if you want to talk about like the nitpicks or whatever, but like to me, there's three things about Man of Steel that I think like didn't hold up for me in rewatch. Right?
Okay, go for it.
One was Jonathan Kent dying. It was just corny. It was super corny how they did it. It didn't really make sense. Like the setup of it was like odd. Like why? Like Jonathan like didn't get out of the hurricane. Like there's so much of it was just almost felt like they were setting it up just to try to find a way to have him die. And like I know we talked about how we don't think his parents need to die, so that for me didn't work at all. And like it just didn't ring true to the character. Like he would just let his dad die kind of thing. And it just happens in a very like corny way. So that one didn't hold up for me. Two was the editing, which I mentioned before. Like in the first half, specifically in the first half, there's like a lot of like really fast cuts between like on the Krypton stuff, and then when he's like finding his way on Earth when he's an adult, there's like he'll be having dialogues and they'll cut to like another scene, like mid dialogue to another scene, like just very fast cuts. And I think that's probably the studio trying to cut the time down a little bit because Batman vs Superman didn't have that issue. So I'm thinking that's probably what it was. There was more of that connective tissue kind of stuff that they just kind of sliced out for time. So it made the first half choppy to me. And then the last thing is killing Zod. Like I don't have a problem with him killing Zod. But it was just, I think the way they did it was so visceral and so violent that set a sour taste in the audience's mind for the whole DCU going forward. Like, I think if they handled that in a different way, we'd be in a completely different situation right now with how these movies are viewed. Because, like, Man of Steel is a solid movie. Like, top to bottom, the movie is just solid. And, like, that as the ending scene with him just snapping Zod's neck was, like in, like, a very, like, violent, like, super violent, like, dark way, which the rest of the movie up to that point, while action-packed, wasn't, like, that, like horrific. You know what I mean? So I think there could have been a different way of him killing Zod or getting rid of Zod that would have made that more palatable for like the mass audiences and then set everything else up. But other than that, like, dude, that fight at the end was like what I always want to see with Superman, like that, like intense, like quick in the air, like fighting and like it just, smashing through like buildings and like almost Dragon Ball Z, like with like how like the debris was flying around there. It was just awesome, and like yeah, that was great. Like that was great cinematography on that.
Yeah. So you hit on, a few things that, I want to spend some time on because they point to what historically now over these past few years have been among the most common criticisms. I think for people who have issues with the movie, people do often cite the tone, that they feel it's, a darker tone than you would typically want in a Superman movie, which again, I don't share that view, but I think that's something that you hear. And the tone, of course, that permeates the movie. So I think we'll kind of hit on that probably in numerous ways as we move forward. But, the Jonathan Kent of it all and the killing of Zod, I think those are areas where, again, you definitely hear a lot of criticism. And I will say, and that's why I love doing this podcast and why I really enjoyed my rewatch, because my perspective on both shifted a little bit. And I'll also say this, I meant to say this at the top, that my perspective on these movies generally, and my defense of them has also changed a lot, because for years, again, like when I went into both movies, I came out, I wasn't like soaring. I wasn't like, oh, those were everything that I wanted in Superman movies, right? Like I had somewhat mixed feelings, but I didn't hate them the way other people did. And when people would hate on them, I would often say, they're not that bad. Like they're not as bad as you think. They're not as bad as you say. And for a long time, that was sort of the best defense that I had of them, which really isn't like a great defense. And now having the benefit of a little time and distance and perspective and subsequent rewatches, again, my perspective has shifted, and it's not just, hey, they're not that bad. They're actually quite strong, I feel. Okay. No, do you want to say something?
Oh, no, because you were talking when you first saw them, and for me, when I walked out of Man of Steel, I loved it. I mean, like, I actually was what you're saying, like, soaring, like, out of it. Like, the way Man of Steel ends when she's like, welcome to the planet, and he's like, glad to be here, Lois, and he smiles. That actually echoed the Christopher Reeve movie, like, the smile at the end to the camera kind of thing. When in the first Christopher Reeve, he smiles at the camera, and then Superman, and then, like, then this one, Clark smiles, and the score comes in, Like, I was like, yeah, Superman kicked ass. Like, that was a great movie. Batman versus Superman, I walked out of the theater hating it. Like, I actually, like, so it's almost the reverse. Like, and it took me a while, like, thinking about it, to ruminate on it and thinking, like, well, maybe it wasn't as bad as maybe it wasn't that bad. And then when I watched it again with the Ultimate Cut, which is, I've only seen the theatrical cut in theaters. Like,
Same.
I think that added half hour, though it makes the movie incredibly long, like, it actually made me like the movie a lot, to the point where I'd say, like, I actually, like, really enjoyed this movie, to the part where, like, I almost quote unquote love the movie. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that like, I had the reverse, where, like, the more I've sat with these movies, the more I like them over and over. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so I want to pick up on that right now, because, we don't have to talk about the movies one at a time. And I think it actually we'll have a richer discussion if we kind of like bounce back and forth, because obviously there's a lot that, is thematically and Clark's journey, obviously in particular, that really, carry across both movies. And to your point about the Ultimate Edition, well, it's funny because I was thinking back to, the differences between the two cuts. And I realized, as you just said, I was like, I think I only saw the theatrical cut once, because once it came out on Blu-ray, it had the Ultimate Edition, and why watch the theatrical cut when I can watch the true vision of the movie? And I'm with you. I think that and for anyone who hasn't seen the Ultimate Edition, please do. You know what I love? On HBO Max, I don't know if you've seen this, but they replaced the theatrical cut with the Ultimate Edition. So if you go on HBO Max, the only version of Batman v Superman you can see is the Ultimate Edition, because that's the true, vision of the movie.
Yeah.
But I think two of the things that the movie does, that the Ultimate Cut does, that really improve a lot. One is you get a lot more of Clark. You get a lot more of Clark investigating. And I think that does two things. And it's funny because I was talking to my wife in advance of this, as I think you were with your fiance, and I was like, talking about everything I was going to say to you in this episode. But she was right there with me, and she has not seen the Ultimate Cut. She's only seen the theatrical. And one of the things she said, she was like, I liked it, but I feel like there wasn't a lot of Clark. And she was right, but there's a lot more in the Ultimate Cut, and you get to see a lot more of Clark investigating, which I think, other than getting to spend more time with Clark, I think the other huge benefit of that is that you get to see so much of the movie is from Batman's perspective, and you see where Batman's animosity towards Superman comes from. But when you watch this and you see Clark investigating the Batman and his cruel methods in Gotham, it's like you see that it's a little bit more two-sided than in the theatrical cut. So I really like that. And the other thing too, this, I mean, more just plot wise, but it really, you get a lot more connective tissue. And I think it becomes clearer. Again, I don't have the, the sharpest memory of the theatrical cut because it's been so many years and I only watched it once, but I think you do get a much clearer picture of all of the strings that Lex was pulling in terms of really setting these two up against each other. The fact that, it was Lex who was sending Clark, the clippings about the Batman and kind of setting him, on that path and requesting that Clark be the one to cover the library gala that Lex hosted, all those sorts of things. And I think, and that whole opening incident in Africa with, and everything that kind of unfolded from there, I think a lot just became much clearer in the extended cut. So I really do hope people will watch that if they haven't already.
It also, like, everything you just said, 100% agree with, because that was when I left the theater. That was one of the things, was like, I'm like, I didn't understand why anyone was doing anything, and Superman just came off as like mean. But like in the real version, the extended version, like Superman is very likable in it, like, because you see Clark trying to do the right thing. You know what I mean? And I think it was such a mistake to cut I think that there was other stuff they could have cut out of that movie instead of the Clark stuff, but I guess they felt that they needed to establish Batman more because he was new and Superman had a movie before. But it definitely made him more likable for sure.
Yeah.
And side note, how awesome was Ben Affleck as Batman? Like, so I hadn't seen it in so long yet. And when I saw it again, because I'm psyched for Robert Pattinson, I think that movie's going to be incredible. And you think he's going to be great. But my memory of Ben Affleck was mostly from Justice League, because that was the movie I'd most seen recently. And he was like, okay, like, but we know that it was, I don't think any of those people were really bringing their A game, because, all the turmoil we've heard about it since then. But he was just awesome in this movie. Like, and the best scene in the whole movie is when he like takes those thugs apart and he like, when he comes into the bat plane, just like wrecks house. It's such a good scene.
I've been a fan of Affleck for decades now, and I followed him, even in the down years when he wasn't really doing as much and wasn't as popular. And so I've loved this resurgence that he's had, and I thought he was great as Batman and Bruce Wayne. And again, going back to Snyder, I mean, the visual take on the character in terms of the costume, but just the physicality, the fighting, and obviously Affleck too. But I just think actor-wise, Bale is still my favorite, but in terms of, I think, visual and overall presentation of the character, I think Batfleck is kind of tops for me after rewatching this.
I would have to agree with you on that, to be honest. Like, I would really, because I agree with you. Like, Bale, like, there's something, and maybe it's because we got like 3 like decompressed movies with him too to really get inside the character, But you're right, but in the suit, Ben Affleck just, he's kicked ass, man. I mean, but that might be up for grabs now with the Robert Pattinson one, because he looks good in the suit. That suit looks sweet. Like, it's got that like sharp kind of stuff, the sharp ears and everything. So we'll see what the new takes are. But yeah, Affleck was great, and him with Henry Cavill, like them, like when they're like in the same frame together, like they look like they fit. You know what I mean? Like their suits, like the design, everything just looks like it looks. Like I said, I felt like I was watching an Ed McGuinness, Jeff Loeb comic from like the early 2000s,
Oh, that's the thing, and especially the big battle between the two of them with him in the armor. It's like right out of the comics. That's why I know I had a hard time really buying like why people were so offended by it. But so we have a lot more to unpack with BVS and the Batman piece of it too, as much as I know our focus is Superman. But going back to Man of Steel and Jonathan and Zod, because I know there was a lot, going on, and people had strong reactions. So as far as killing Zod, what I always said about it was I understood why Clark made the choice he did in the moment. I was just sad that the movie put him in that position where he had to make that choice. After rewatching it, and I might lose some people here who are like, no, like this is so counter to who Superman is, but all right, here's the thing. I love that Superman, Clark, is a man of high ideals. I love that he'll always find another way. Like I know you're, of course, a fellow Smallville fan. I love that Legion of Superheroes episode in season 8 when Chloe is possessed by Brainiac, and the Legion says the only way we can stop Brainiac is to kill Chloe, kill his vessel. And Clark and it's this beautiful scene where Clark is like, there's a human being inside. There's always another way. Like, if you ever believed in me, you would know rule number 1 is do not kill, ever, right? Mm-hmm. And that's great. And I love that about the character. But to get meta for a second, the reason why Superman is able to live up to that is because the writers who craft the stories that he's in always give him an out. And a perfect example, right? So I just did a couple of episodes on the Jeff Loeb, Joe Kelly era of the Superman books. And there's an issue of Loeb's Superman where Superman is temporarily aligned with Mongol, and they're fighting Imperiacs out in space. And they beat Imperiacs, and then, of course, Mongol turns on Superman, of course. And Superman, was able to subdue him. But there's this quick moment where Superman's kind of like, what do I do with him? Very conveniently, Lobo happens to be passing by. And Lobo says, oh, there's a bounty on him. I'll take him. And it's fine. And of course, it works, right? But he had an out. And so it's sort of like, well, what would happen if you don't give him that out? And again, if someone's out there and they're saying, well, I just wish that the movie didn't put him in that position. Again, in the past kind of fell into that camp, but I don't know if you are trying to do something different and place him in a real world setting, I think, again, if nothing else, it was an interesting choice, but I wasn't as bothered by it, I guess, as I was in the past, because it's like, okay, it's great that he will always try to find another way, but if it really comes to it, he is willing to make that choice if he really has to. And going back to what you were saying before about the differences with the comics, it was always kind of interesting to me that people were so offended by this. To your point, I do agree. I mean, it was particularly violent and visceral, but in the John Byrne run on the Superman books, his run ends with Superman executing Zod and the other Kryptonian criminals, and in that case, it's not even in the heat of battle. I mean, it's like he truly executes them. And then, that sets off that whole storyline where he's plagued by guilt and he, heads off into space and all of that. But I don't know. So there's precedent for it in the comics. And I don't know, maybe it's more palatable to people if he's, a little bit calmer and colder as he's doing it, as opposed to in the heat of battle. But to me, it just felt like in that moment, that was the only option he had. And he's willing to go that far if he has to.
Yeah. I mean, so I wasn't so offended by it because to jump to Batman versus Superman as well, Batman kills a shitload of people in that movie when I'm rewatching it, guns blazing and stuff. But you don't really notice it because it's filmed in a way where it's almost like Star Wars, right? Where you're not thinking about the person in the ship that's blowing up kind of thing. And so the thing with Batman, with Man of Steel, with Zod is I totally agree. And the symbolism in it that I felt was that, and I always thought this became so much clearer to me in the rewatch, was that it was as though he was the last tie to his home world, and there was this random human family, and if it comes down to a random human who has no connection to, and the last of his people, he's always going to pick the human because deep down he is a human being. He's not a Kryptonian. In his where his self-identifying allegiance lies. Earth is his home, so he'll do anything he can to protect his home. Right? Like I said, it went almost into the realm of Mortal Kombat with the neck snap, right? And so I feel like there could have been a way where if he did it, it's not that I'm opposed to him killing him. It's more like if they were in a heat vision battle and he just overpowered him with heat vision, and then Zod was vaporized or something. I feel like there could have been a way to do it that it wasn't so just raw. But again, the choice of it, ultimately, I didn't really have a problem with it, and I get why people bristle against it. I do get it. But at the same time, like you're saying, this real world take that he's going for, this completely different, unique vision on the character, I feel like it fits. So I just think it was a shame because I think it soured the rest of the universe, the perception of the universe going forward,
I think you're 100% right, for sure. And I'm going to argue against myself for a second here because, I watched this as an adult, right? And I was able to reconcile it with my vision of the character. If I were a kid, or if I were taking my child to see a Superman movie and that were their first exposure to Superman, and that's the imagery, yeah, I don't know. I might feel a little differently, you know, but again, at least as far as, you know, where I was, it made sense. And, you know, going back to what I was saying before about kind of, you know, picking up on things or appreciating things in a little different way. I think the first time I saw that, I watched that scene and, you know, where Superman is, you know, restraining Zod and pleading with him. He's like, stop, like, don't. And I think the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, he's like, you know, telling him, you know, don't kill this family. But then rewatching it, it's like he's pleading with him because it's like he knows that Zod is putting him in a position where he's going to have to kill. And he's saying, like, don't make me do this.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah, totally. That's totally what's going on there, yeah.
You know, and so I really like that aspect of it. So, you know, again, I know that was definitely, you know, one of the most, you know, controversial aspects. But let's talk about Jonathan. Because it's not only Jonathan's death, there's also the advice that Jonathan gives Clark, specifically after Clark saves his bus full of classmates from drowning, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, Jonathan is like chastising him for risking exposure. And Clark says, what was I supposed to do? Let them die? And Jonathan says, maybe. And I remember that was in the trailer, one of the trailers. And I remember at my comic shop, like that was a debate, like people, not even much of a debate. Like people were like people definitely bristled at the notion of Pa Kent, you know, who we typically, you know, he's typically depicted as following a certain code, like, you know, saying that to Clark. But I'll tell you, man, and I felt this then, and now as a father, I feel it even more so. Like all of that rang completely true for me. And the whole theme of fathers and sons in this movie really spoke to me in a different way this time. This was the first time I watched the movie after my son being born. He's over 1 now. And, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, man. I was crying like a couple minutes into the movie, when we were in the Krypton sequence, and they're putting Clark in the rocket, and, you know, Lara's expressing concern, like, you know, he'll be a freak, he'll be hunted, he'll be killed. And, you know, Jor-El says he'll be a god to them. And, you know, that has always, you know, kind of resonated with me, but definitely more so now. And, you know, I always think about it. It's like Jor-El throws the ultimate, like, Hail Mary pass across the universe, and Jonathan Kent and Martha catch it. It's a beautiful thing. And, but so this whole idea of Jonathan, you know, giving Clark that advice, it's like, you know, as a parent, it's not that you're driven by fear, you know, it's not like we're petrified all the time, but at the same time, you know, you have to do everything you can, right, to protect your child. And so, you know, if Jonathan felt like, you know, people finding out about Clark would result in Clark being taken, experimented on, killed, any of those things, it's like, of course. And it's like, as a father, it's like, there's nothing I wouldn't do. There's nothing I wouldn't tell my son to do or not do if it meant keeping him safe. And so, again, I know people had an issue with that too, but I don't know. That made sense to me.
It did make sense. And I think that people, like, I think you took the right message away from it. I think that a lot of people got the wrong, like, one of the complaints I've heard about these movies was that Jonathan's like, he's telling Superman to be a dick and just let people die. And it's like, that's not what he's telling him. He's saying that he wants to protect him no matter what. And you do see later on, when in that scene where Clark's bullied in the truck, like, you get the, like, he definitely gives him that Jonathan Kent kind of wisdom when he's like, what, you kick his ass? Well, then what, is that gonna make you feel better? Like he's telling him, he's raising him how to be that good person we know, but doing it in a way where he gets there on his own. Did you notice that? Where he's like, yeah. It wasn't like the John Schneider version where, like, he, like, chastises Clark to be like, this isn't what we do, Clark. This is how to be a good person. It is more like, you know what's right, you know what's wrong, and you have to get to that conclusion on your own. Otherwise, like, it's not going to mean anything. It was this much more subtler take on it. But in the rewatch, I noticed it was there, man. It was like that whole idea that, like, Superman is who he is because of the Kents. It was in there. It was just very subtle and artfully done, as opposed to being hit over the head, you know. And that's, I think, might have gone over a lot of people's heads. Like, you know, they might not have seen that without, like, really looking for it, you know?
Yeah. And, again, like, right, we love Smallville, right? And we love the John Schneider version of Pa Kent. But
he's my favorite. He's my favorite. I don't want to everyone know that.
No,
like, he's my favorite Pa Kent.
Same here, but it's like I appreciated the Kevin Costner version, and I like that there was a little different type of flavor to Jonathan Kent. I don't need him to be depicted the same way, in every interpretation. And I agree with you, because there are numerous instances of that where, Jonathan is sharing wisdom, but it's maybe not beating you over the head with it as much as, in other instances. And, whether he's telling Clark, you owe it to yourself to find out, who you are and what your place in the world is going to, like, even if it takes you your whole life, like, you have to find this out. You have to decide what kind of person you're going to be, whoever that is, that's going to change the world. So I definitely think, like, the traditional values, that you associate with the Kents imparting to Clark, I think that's still there. It's like, no, you don't necessarily get that moment, like from Superman the movie, where, right before he has his heart attack, Pa's like, you were sent here for a reason. Although you get that too. I mean, you get this too.
Segue a little bit.
Yeah.
That scene in Superman 79, he's like, "You are here for a reason." Did you notice the callback to that in Batman versus Superman? When Batman was like, he's like, "I bet you your parents told you were here for a reason." My parents.
Oh, that's right.
He's like, the dying in the alley. Like, I thought that was a great, like, little call, because there's no way Snyder didn't do that intentionally. Like, that was 100% a callback to 79 Superman. So
that is true. Yeah. And so, and then of course, the whole bit of Jonathan, dying in the tornado, the aspect of that is still, like, out of all of the things in the movie, I think the one thing that I still can't fully get behind is that Clark would let him die, as you said before. Yeah. But as far as Jonathan telling Clark to stay back, right, to keep his secret, that I got. And so this kind of ties back in with what I was saying before, right? And this, because so much of these two movies, and perhaps Justice League when we see the true vision of that film as well, but, so much of these movies is about, as I said before, like, what Clark's relationship with the world is going to be, right? And I really wanted to talk about this because I've been thinking about it a lot, and I feel like if I have one gripe with probably most other tellings of the origin, it's that I really feel they take for granted the fact that Clark would put on this costume and be a public-facing symbol the way he is. I think it's often taken for granted that it's just like, oh, okay, like, he'll become Superman. And I think in all of the versions of the origin, like, you see plenty of the Kents, imparting values, right? Like, you understand why he's a good person, why he doesn't use his powers for ill. That's fine. But I feel like it's such a huge leap from he's a good person and he'll use his powers to help people when he can to, like, he's going to become this symbol. And that's why I love stories like this and like Superman Birthright by Mark Waid, where they really take the time to show you, like, why he would take this step, because I think it's, I don't think it's such a given as people would think. And, that's why, like, I love, with Smallville, going back to that as we always do, obviously they had to sustain that story over so many years. Right. And so I think that's why we got the Blur and, all that stuff. But that whole period of time where he's operating in Metropolis as the Blur, in secret, like, he's using his powers, but he's not out there in front of the world, and he's still maintaining his, day-to-day life. It makes sense to me that there would be some sort of, like, intermediate step before becoming Superman. And then similarly, did you ever read American Alien, the miniseries?
No, I never did, no.
It was pretty cool. And there, too, there was an interesting addition where before Clark fully becomes Superman, he tries out a version of a costume with a mask. And that too, it's like, of course, ultimately Superman, of course he won't have a mask, but it makes sense to me that he would attempt it. Yeah. Right. Before he would go the route of being disguised in his civilian life. So again, that's why I really like stories where we have the opportunity to see why he makes the choices that he makes. And especially setting these movies, in modern day, in the, the real world, it's like it's very understandable to me why Jonathan and then later Clark would really wrestle with how the world would respond to him. And we see that pay off then in Batman v Superman. We see how the world reacts to him, and it's a very mixed reaction. And I just think that rings true.
Yeah, I want to jump back to that.
Yeah.
Don't let me forget the way the world sees Superman. But
yeah.
But yeah, like I liked how in Man of Steel how the beginning was him basically being Superman without the suit, right? Like he was like, it was the whole thing in Birthright where he's going around helping people just like kind of like in an aimless way. You know what I mean? Like, and I really dug that whole scene with the in the ocean, the oil rig.
The oil rig, yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome. Like all of that was so cool. And yeah, and I love the idea that the suit is a Kryptonian suit too. Like I really like that. Like I like that's not something his mom makes. I think that's like really hokey. So I like that it's from Krypton and it's and the suit looks great too. There's something we were talking with Jonathan Kent, you had brought this up that like I know neither of us really like him dying in the story. Like we want him to be there, and I think he would have been such a great addition in Batman vs Superman if he was still there too. But when the reason I think the '79 Superman version of him dying is so powerful is because he says it when he's at the grave when he's like, all these powers and all these things I can do and I couldn't save him. Like this was beyond my reach. Like to basically establish like you're not God. You know what I mean? Like it's where in this version he totally could have saved him. And like it wasn't something that was like unattainable. And even like he didn't really even have to reveal himself. Like he could have used super speed to, you know what I mean? Like it could have been like it was just such and the reason, did you notice that like the reason that he was even out there was because he was like hurting people almost. He's like, come on, go to that overpass, but it's like, why are you doing this? Like they're going on their own. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I know.
So that was like I get why they wanted it in there and why the idea that why Superman's been holding back is because his father made a sacrifice to allow him to keep his identity. Like I get that, but I don't think it read in a super powerful way. You know, there was so many like plot holes through it that like I get, and ultimately like because I know what the artist was trying to say with it, like, or what I would assume, you know, what our interpretation of it is what I'm assuming what the artist is trying to say. Like it doesn't bother me so bad, but for people who are less open, I guess, to different versions of the character, I get why that bothers them so much. You know.
For sure. And, you know, I've always been in the camp, you know, that you just described where, you know, I like when both Ma and Pa are alive and they're there to give him counsel when he needs it, when he goes back to the farm. But, you know, if Jonathan is going to die, you know, but it teaches Clark the lesson that he can't save everyone like in Superman the movie, like, you know, then I'm kind of okay with it. So yeah, this definitely was a completely different approach. I will say, just as a side note, regardless of how Jonathan dies, I've amended my thinking slightly because I think that you do get one additional benefit by having him pass at you know, that especially at that point in Clark's journey before he you know, becomes Superman, and that's it gives Martha more to do. You know, because you think about it, it's like in most instances, like it's Jonathan who's showing him the ship. It's Jonathan who tells him he's there for a reason. It's Jonathan, you know, having these moments with him. And once Jonathan's gone and then Superman's an adult, like you have those moments with Martha. So I do kind of, so that's, you know, I guess again, to argue against myself a little bit, like it gives Martha more to do where typically she is more passive and just kind of more there with Jonathan. Martha has, you know, perhaps some slightly controversial advice in Batman v Superman when, you know, Clark's, you know, in a moment of doubt and he visits her and she's like, you know, be their hero, be their savior, or, you know, or be none of it. Like, you don't owe the world a damn thing. You never did.
That was so I thought that was very out of nowhere and like off model for the character in these movies. Like, you know what I mean? Like not for the comic book version, but for the character up to this point, I felt like it was very like out of nowhere. Did you get that from that, or did you read what the intent was supposed to be there?
I think in the context of that movie and what we were seeing about how the world was receiving him, I think it worked well enough. And I know you want it, so we'll circle back to that, but I just want to go back to Jonathan and that tornado scene. I think that probably added to people's frustration because, yeah, whether it was the staging or just the overall setup or the editing or whatever, I think maybe it could have been executed a little bit better. And certainly, yes, if you, and I know it was a particularly interesting choice that it was a tornado, because it's like you said, like Clark would have the perfect cover, you know, to save Jonathan, and no one would know. But
Yeah.
it's like I can try to take a step back and not worry so much about that aspect of it, and just try to think like more big picture, like what it accomplishes. And I think ultimately it really hammers home what a big deal it is for Clark to reveal himself to the world in any way, really. It's such a big deal that Pa Kent was willing to die to allow Clark to do it if he wanted to do it in his own time and on his own terms. So, you know, I think it just continues to hammer home this theme of like, what is Clark going to be to the world, and how is the world going to receive him? And, you know, again, you know, ultimately whether that particularly was the right choice, you know, for the film, again, I do think it supports the overall theme. You know, there are aspects of that I still kind of, you know, it's a little hard to take, but you know, one other thing that was kind of interesting that I was thinking about on the rewatch is we get another little variation in the origin where back on Krypton, you know, Zod kills Jor-El before the planet explodes, right? Typically, right, in almost every version, it's Jor-El and Lara together, right, as the planet explodes. And here we have, you know, Jor-El getting killed in the process of saving his son. And then we have Jonathan, where when he dies in the origin story, or if he dies in the origin story, you know, it's almost always the heart attack. He grabs the arm, he goes down. Here, you know, he's not killed in the way that Jor-El is killed, but there's still, it's a different type of death. Like he's dying. It's not just nature taking its course, even though it's a tornado, but you know, it's not a heart attack, but it's, you know, he's choosing to die for his son. So that the symmetry of two fathers willing to die and dying for their son, that, you know, certainly resonated with me. And that, again, was something that on the rewatch I was thinking about, because obviously, you know, each death individually, of course, was a conscious choice on the filmmaker's part, but I think it was also a conscious choice that they both gave their lives, like in a different way than they typically do in the origin story.
Yeah, that's a really, I did not put that together, but that 100%, that makes sense. Is probably what was going through, like, their minds, like, making it, you know, and that makes me like it more now. Like, thinking about it in that way, like, that like, the idea that he is sacrificing himself, like, the symmetry of that, they both sacrifice themselves for their son, kind of thing.
Just as then, like, Clark will sacrifice himself for the world in Batman v Superman, you know?
Yeah.
So that kind of worked for me. And I also, speaking of Krypton, so like I said, I was weeping, you know, minutes into the movie. And, but I got to tell you, man, for every time that I've watched the movie, this has been consistent. This is my favorite depiction of Krypton. Because like anytime I watch the origin story, you know, I love it all, but like the Krypton piece is always sort of like, you just kind of got to get through it. Right. This was the first time that I was like, what's going on Krypton? I was curious what you thought. And also, especially as an artist, like, what did you think about the design and the aesthetic of Krypton in these movies?
I really liked that. I liked that they were more almost like a tribal, like, warlike race. Like, I thought like they were like a conquering race. I liked the idea that they weren't this virtuous, perfect society, right? Like, I liked the idea that they were kind of dicks, you know what I mean? And their own hubris of like mining their planet to shit is what like led to their downfall, you know? And the idea that Superman is he's Krypton's last hope because he's the last one, but he's also the only natural birth that they've had, which I think that's new for this origin. Maybe it's not. Maybe that's from another one, but it never in the media was it ever depicted that way. And the idea that he was like they're almost like farming like people like through like science, you know, like, and predetermining what they're going to be, like a soldier, a farmer, a worker, or an infantry guy, you know? So the idea that Superman, he has the freedom to choose who he wants to be and who he chooses to be a good person and like a quote unquote savior character, that made his choice to become Superman like that much more powerful for me. And then the idea that, like, I loved the aesthetic of Krypton, like how there was no straight lines in it. Like everything was curved. Did you notice that? Like everything, like all the architecture, everything, there were no like straight angle, like IKEA angles. Everything had like arced and moved and curved. So and they had that motif throughout everything, the costumes, the armor, the ships, everything had that motif. So I thought it was a really cool visual take on it. There's dragons flying around. It just had this very like medieval kind of look to it, that they almost had like a knight kind of like armor system. So like the Superman suit is almost that like the chainmail, and then like the stuff that comes on top is like the heavy armor. It just all had a very, very cool look. Like, what did you think about it?
I loved it. Yeah. And, again, going back to what I was saying before, it's like, here was an attempt to do something different. I mean, this was a departure from the ice and the crystals and all that.
No crystal.
No crystal.
It was almost the opposite. It looked like hot. Like the planet looked really hot. Did you think that? Like,
yes.
There's like fire pits and stuff in it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, no, I completely dug it. And like I said, and I don't know, it's hard to say really what, I mean, I like the aesthetic, but as far as why I was so engaged with the Krypton aspect, maybe because both Jor-El and Lara were like way more active than they typically are in these stories. Usually it's just Jor-El like trying to convince the council and they don't listen, and then they put him in the rocket and the planet explodes, So I feel like here, like Jor-El's running around like he's fighting Zod. Oh, also, did you ever see Cinderella Man?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I love that movie. Russell Crowe plays a boxer, and I feel like that boxing training, man, came back when he was boxing
good.
Zod. It was great.
It was good. It was great. Yeah, the fight with Zod, it made Jor-El like an ass kicker, And he didn't even have an argument with the council in this movie, did he? Oh no, he did. No, he did. Yeah, he did. Yeah. Never mind.
They never listen, no matter what version. They just never listen to Jor-El.
But dude, that scene when Zod is coming for him and Jor-El's like in that like almost that like Iron Man thing where like the suit's coming on him and everything click locks into place, and there's this quick moment he looks up and like his like hair blows a little bit. Did you notice that? Like it had a very like comic booky like animation kind of like thing going where like he had this updraft come like everything's like, and it's such a good cinematography on it. Like I love that scene.
Yeah, no, the Krypton stuff was awesome, and so Jor-El was active. Lara was the one I believe who found Earth. She had been, trying to find a place. So like, I felt like they had more to do. It was action packed. It was so cool. Like I really dug it. And, you were saying about, Kal-El being the first natural birth in a very long time. And that was another thing that I really enjoyed. And more so in this rewatch, this whole idea of, prior to Kal-El, like all of these generations of Kryptonians were, bred for a specific purpose in society. And that actually gave me a little bit of sympathy for Zod. I saw Zod in a little bit of a different light, especially in the battle with Clark later in the movie, where he says like, protecting Krypton, ensuring Krypton's survival, like that's my only directive. Like that's what I was made to do. And, obviously, we don't agree with his methods, but like I felt a bit of, or I felt like I had a little bit more of understanding, for Zod, especially kind of keeping that in mind. Like this whole idea of like, this is all this guy knew and all he had. And obviously he took it to the extreme, but like, that's what he was made for.
Yeah. I'll go one step further. Because I want to talk about Zod. I actually think Zod might be one of my favorite villains in comic book movies, like of all superhero movies, because one, Michael Shannon's just awesome. Like,
so good. He's so good.
I mean, he looks odd, like he looks imposing, and he's not like a brute, right? Like he's not like just like strong, but like not like Bane kind of character, like not like like he's not like one of those like 97 Bane, like
he's not just a physical threat.
Yeah, he's not just a physical threat. He's also like an intellectual threat, but he is still a physical threat at the same time. And he looks really cool. Like, again, like his design, the suit, everything. Like, it's rare in these superhero movies that, like, all three check the boxes for me. That, like, they look cool, they act cool, and they're also, like, a mental threat as well as a physical threat. And there's a good actor playing them. So it's, like, it's hard for that, like, the trifecta. Because they usually get 2 or 3 of them, but they never get, like, all of them, Like, so, and I think Zod was he was a great villain to have for this first part, and it just felt like you said, like everything that he was doing, it wasn't out of like psychotic. He wasn't psychotically evil. He was like from his own perspective, he was trying to save this planet.
Yeah.
So you could like, while not agree with him, you can understand the motivation.
Yeah. No, for sure. And, I know we touched on this before, but the battle, I mean, this epic battle that we get in this movie, it's like, You know, again, if whatever opinions people have, like that's fine. But you know, as I was watching this, I'm like you've never seen something like this in a Superman movie. Like this is awesome, and it's like yes, there's a lot of destruction, but going back to what we keep saying, like if you are trying to show the real world ramifications of a type of battle like this, it's like, yeah, a city would be decimated. I mean, I guess people were, maybe there were some complaints because, Clark didn't take enough or didn't make enough of an effort to try to move the battle or try to save people in the process. But I don't know, as I was rewatching it, I don't know that really carries weight, to be honest, that argument.
No,
the battle was so intense.
Yeah, it was that, and also they make the point that Superman's not a fighter at this point. Like, he's very much like almost just like football tackling Zod. Like he's not using. There's one point when I think when he's fighting Feora in Smallville, which that fight's awesome too, the Smallville fight. But you could tell he's almost kind of like throwing punches, and Feora is using like just straight up like martial art kind of moves and just taking him down. Like so the idea that like Superman was almost like out of his depth. He was just basically just trying to like power through it like strength wise. And dude, the battle was awesome because I've been watching a lot of Dragon Ball Super recently. That's been on Hulu, and so I watched these movies like in between like watching those. And when I got to that end fight, I'm like, oh my god, this is like that kind of like fight. Like I forgot how just awesome. So like the debris, like how like they animated the debris like flying around them, and like just like the shock waves, and like when they fly. And they're flying against the building. Like I think Superman's flying down and Zod's running up, and they crash into each other and creates a shockwave that ripples across the building. Just very visually cool moments, that we had never seen in the Superman movie. And I hope that we see more of stuff like that. I mean, you don't have to have it in a city, like as I know people had an issue with that. But most of the destruction in the city came from that like machine thing, like the whole area that was like leveled out that became the park in. Batman vs Superman was like where the machine was like pulsing through it was like boom, doing that thing. So it wasn't really Superman causing the havoc,
And I agree with you about Superman as a fighter, and on top of that, like this was his first outing as Superman.
Yeah.
It's like he's probably not going to make all the right choices, and kind of going back to killing Zod. It's like this was his first time. Like I don't know, maybe he wouldn't make that choice a year or two later. But yeah, it's like, and we get two instances earlier in the movie where Clark is antagonized and he doesn't fight back, right? The one you mentioned before when he's a kid, and then in Smallville, and Jonathan has that talk with him, and then when he's an adult and he's working at that bar, and those guys dump the beer on his head, and it's like he restrains himself. But the implication of that, because I was thinking about this, it's like when he finally fights Zod and the crew, like that's the first time this guy's like ever thrown a punch. And it's like, yeah, it is a very unrefined fighting style. Like he's more of a brawler in this, Oh, you're actually, you're muted there, sir. Let's see. Actually, this while we sort this out, here's a perfect time to hear a word about our sponsors. So we will be right back. Submissions are now open for the March season of the Brightside Tavern Film Festival in Jersey City, New Jersey. Visit filmfreeway.com to submit your film now. Also, be sure to listen to the podcasts hosted by the festival's organizer, CJ Cullen. You can find the official Hang On to Your Shorts podcast, as well as the Cullen on Film podcast, via a shared universe network. The Hive Comics and Games is an oasis of nerd fun and events in the heart of Odessa, Texas. Whether it's comic book superhero stories or role-playing in a dungeon, the Hive is where to be. Come tap your mana and face off against the top Magic the Gathering players in West Texas. Hive carries a majority of new comic titles each Wednesday and has all of your favorite titles in their back issue section. Follow them on Facebook at The Hive Comics and on Instagram at The Hive Comic Shop. All right, and we're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's a little bit low, but I can hear you. Actually, I can adjust that on my end. All right, and while you were gone, what's up?
No, I think I had a phone call that I had to X out, so I think that's what happened.
while you were gone, we heard a word from our sponsors, so it all worked out. And I thought I was going to have to, do some editing or what? No, we just kept going. It's great. And I hope, hopefully people are understanding. We're dealing with remote recordings and Wi-Fi and all sorts of issues. So thank you for riding with us here. So where were we? We were talking about the battle, right? And the fact that Clark was a bit more of a brawler, right? Was there anything that you were going to say at that point?
Just that, yeah. So he's a brawler, and the Smallville. I thought the fight with Smallville was great. A lot of visually interesting stuff. A lot of property damage. I know that was something that people complain about, but ultimately, though, to me, like this is a movie. You know what I mean? Like, it's not real. Like, Superman didn't really destroy someone's business. So it's like visual, just it's supposed to be visually interesting, and it was just like that. I thought it was cool. You know what I mean? I thought it was a cool visual take.
Yeah. And, there's another criticism. There's actually a YouTube video that one of my buddies sent me. He's not a fan of the Snyder movies, and he sent me this video, and I did watch it. And essentially it argues that a fatal flaw in the movie is that, the crux of Clark's conflict, right, is whether to reveal himself to the world. And that the flaw of the movie is that choice is taken away from him when Zod shows up and says, there's one of my people, in your midst. And I guess I agree that it forces Clark's hand, it brings the inner conflict to a head. Now he has to make a choice, but he still has a choice to make. And I mean, to the critics' point, it's yes, I guess now it's not so mind-blowing that there are aliens out there, right? Because if Clark stepped forward and says, I'm from another planet, that's big news to people. So Zod coming first kind of, takes lets a little of that air out. But I don't know. I feel like Clark still has that big choice to make. So I disagree with that criticism of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
he didn't have to step forward so publicly. He didn't have to be floating in the costume. He could have just been gone to the military discreetly.
Right.
He didn't have to be there in the suit. So.
Exactly. And I know we talked when you were in the premiere episode of this podcast, and we talked about the slyness that Christopher Reeve had as the character. There's a little, you don't get a ton of that. And, again, this, I guess, goes to the tone, right? Henry Cavill's a real charming guy and a charming actor. And, you don't get to see so much of that, but there is some of it. And the scene where he's in the interrogation room with Lois and she's asking him about the S, and he's like, it's not an S. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, he definitely hit my my Superman cool factor that we were talking about in the first episode, where Superman should be cool. He definitely has it. It's a different way than what Christopher Reeve was, for sure, but it's his own. He's more like a tougher cool. He's like silent, kind of brooding, kind of cool, But it's still cool. So, and you're right. He's still that's not an S. He definitely has elements of that in there. So, yeah. He's a great Superman. I hope we get more with him, because he was great.
And I know I keep harping on this, but the this idea of a more real world approach here, and why it would be such a big deal for Superman to exist and to reveal his existence. It's again, going back to the Christopher Reeve movie, it's that that very charming, sweet, romantic scene on the rooftop where Lois is interviewing Superman, and he says he's from a planet called Krypton, and she's just oh, okay, how do you spell it? It's this is huge news.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and again, that's like I said, a real sweet, charming, I love that the Christopher Reeve movie, or the first two, that they're out there. That's great. It's I'm not saying that, hey, you should only watch the Snyder version, but I really do think the Snyder version is perfectly just as valid. And, that the choices made really support this, this vision. And so, again, so we've built up to it this whole movie, right? Pa died so that he didn't have to step forward. So when he makes that choice, even if Zod forces his hand, he's still taking the step to do that. I want to talk about Lois for a second, because, Amy Adams really grew on me, in my rewatches. Not that I ever disliked her before in the role, but I really came to enjoy her performance more. And I want to get your take on this, because this is also a very different role for Lois in the origin story, right? In most versions, he shows up and then he's already Superman, right? And then he saves her, and then he very quickly becomes Superman right after, and she doesn't know his identity initially, or in some cases, for the whole story. So I actually I really liked this twist on it that she was, such an integral part of his origin, and that they
Hmm.
completely dispensed with the love triangle and her not knowing his true identity and all of that. Like at the end of the day, if you said to me, Anthony, you can only have one version of the origin story and Lois's role in it, would I pick this? Probably not, but I dug it a lot. What about you?
Yeah, no, I really liked it, and I liked that it, because as a comic book fan, and I'm sure you're the same way, is that I've always known Superman and Lois to be married. Like as a reader, like they've always been married, right? So I like how in this movie they kind of fast tracked to that point, even though they were never actually married in these movies. They got to that point where they like know each other. Like she knows his identity, she's on his side. Like they've got each other's backs. Like, and it maybe that is kind of weird for people who don't read the comics because it's like, wait, this isn't the status quo that I know about Superman with the love triangle. But I like again, that's one of the reasons that made it feel like a comic book to me. Like it felt like it was ripped right out of the pages. Like they took that very modern take of Lois and put her in the movie, as opposed to doing the love triangle with Clark, Lois, and Superman.
Yep, no, for
So I
sure.
definitely agree. I agree. I really like it.
Also, Lawrence Fishburne is my favorite Perry White.
Oh, me too. Me too. Me too. For sure.
Love that. Like so good.
He was. Did you notice that he was like funnier in Batman versus Superman?
Yeah.
He had like these like zingers. Like.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because okay, this is I do have a couple of nitpicks. All right, and a couple of them are Daily Planet related. So, in Batman v Superman, like Perry ribs Clark a couple of times where when he sends him to Gotham he's like, don't let him take your lunch money. And when Clark gets invited to cover Lex's benefit, he's like, he must have a thing for nerds. It's like, okay,
yeah,
you can put him in glasses, but like he's still Henry Cavill. It's like I don't buy that he would be seen as this nerd.
No, but I think that like his personality though, like what was shown there, he kind of came off as like as Clark at the Daily Planet, he was kind of like a stick in the mud a little bit. Not stick in the mud, but kind of like he's like that's this whole thing is that he's from Smallville, right? Like so right. He's like green, he's wet behind the ears kind of thing. So I actually kind of like that Perry was like doing those digs on him, But you're right, like it's Henry Cavill in glasses. Like he's not like a Poindexter, So
right. And then my other nitpick is, and this is actually a bigger issue. Again, it's not the end of the world, but I had mentioned Superman Birthright earlier, right? My favorite take on the origin that Mark Waid wrote. And I know this is kind of heresy to even be talking about Waid and Snyder in the same conversation, because I know Waid has publicly stated he was not a fan, but the origin stories do have certain similarities. But one thing that I really, really loved about Birthright was that when Clark was traveling the world and helping people and using his powers in secret, he was also a journalist. I really like the idea of journalism being more to Clark than just a cover. And in Man of Steel, it really is kind of, and look, they had a lot of ground to cover, and I think they did what they could, but it does feel kind of perfunctory. Like when, Martha asks him, like, what is he going to do? He's like, well, I need a place where I can, be in the middle of the action and no one will think twice. And, he picks journalism, and obviously he has the connection with Lois, but I like the idea of journalism being a passion and a calling for him, not just a cover, especially in modern times, right? Like back when Superman was created, like I feel like it made more sense because how else would you find out about what's going on, like up to the minute? But these days, it's like if you have a cell phone and a police scanner, it's like you have everything you really need. So I like the idea of journalism actually being something that Clark cares about. And by the time we get to Batman v Superman and you see him investigating, it's like I think that's there. But I would have liked, I guess, if when he was traveling the world, if there had been a little journalism aspect. I don't know that it really would have fit in this movie, but that's something that is a little bit of a pet peeve for me in the general origin tellings.
Yeah, because especially because as adults we know that like getting a job like that is insanely difficult,
right?
So like for him to like not have this like lifelong passion to do it and just like gets a job, what I mean? So it's like a lot of people want like the small amount of jobs, so it'd be like, yeah, I want to be an astronaut, and he becomes an astronaut, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, for sure. One of the things that bothered me about the Daily Planet Batman versus this is such a nitpick, but it it butted up against the realism that they're going for, was that Clark was like hell-bent on exposing Batman, right? But Perry was like, no, that's not going to sell papers. You need to cover this college football game, and you need to cover this library function. Batman's not going to sell papers. Like, and I feel like in the real world, people would be way more interested in like if Batman was real than like the Metropolis versus Gotham college football game. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, wait, what? Like, that was one of the things that I thought was a little strange. You know, like.
Dude, I'm so there with you. I was thinking the same thing, because it's like, obviously, you know, Perry needs to be like skeptical to an extent, and you need a little bit of tension there where like Lois wants to pursue something and, you know, he's kind of in the way. Like, you want a little bit of that. But like, I agree with that in particular. It's like, hey, I can cover this vigilante who's branding people.
Yeah.
Like, or a football game, and he's like, you better cover that game. It's like, what is, that was a little odd.
Or the library thing that he was inventing, which has even less appeal to people, you know what I mean? Like the Lex library donation. Like.
All right, while we're doing nitpicks, I got a couple more.
Yeah.
And again, I love these movies, but there were a couple little things. At that benefit, right, where, you know, Clark is outside and Bruce shows up, and Clark turns to the guy next to him and he's like, who's that? Now, Bruce Wayne is this like famous billionaire who lives in the city across the bay, and Clark is a journalist. Like, he should know. Don't you think he should know who Bruce Wayne is?
It would be like a reporter at one of like at the Met Gala being like, hey, who is that guy? Like, oh, that's David Beckham. You don't know that? Like it'd be like, it's like this like super famous person, you know, or like, oh yeah, it's Michael Strahan. You don't know, he lives here in New York. You don't know this? Like, it's like, that was a little weird. Yeah, for sure. And especially because like Affleck's Bruce Wayne wasn't like the Keaton like recluse Bruce Wayne. Like, he was like very much like out there, like, you know, running the streets, you know, like, so yeah.
On that note, actually, one of the things that I really liked, and this was so small, but it was a nice touch. You know, obviously in all the Batman stories, right, he has this playboy persona, right? And he's always, you know, leaving the party with a pretty girl, but, you know, then he'll part ways. And in one of the scenes, like, he wakes up and there's a woman in the bed next to him, and it's like, yeah, it's like, as much as being a playboy is like his cover, I mean, it's like he's still a man, and so it's like I like that. I felt like that was you know, a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, I like that. That's cool. And that dude, his house on the lake, I was like, I want a house like this.
Yeah.
I want this house. I gotta become a billionaire, so I can get a house like this.
So I guess like we're kind of moving into more Batman v Superman territory, but I wanted to say one other thing visually that I thought was kind of cool about Man of Steel is that it's very like elemental. Like, I felt that, you know, we talked about, you know, Krypton, you know, instead of being ice, like it was more like fire. And then there's the scene on the oil rig, so we get the fire. Water, you know, Clark, you know, when he's blown off the oil rig, right, and like he's in the water, there's that. Then when he's learning to fly, I mean, obviously the air, and then the earth that's kind of like moving, you know, beneath him as he's about to take off. Like, I like those little cues. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I really liked the gravity coming up around him when he flies and when he takes off. I thought that was a very cool touch that like just made everything look more kind of like epic, and like it led to that like godlike thing they were going for. You know, just like that was very cool touch.
Yeah. So as we, you know, get a bit deeper into Batman v Superman, all right, let's talk about one of the things that is criticized and ridiculed probably more than anything else, and I'm talking about Martha. How do you feel about Martha?
So I get what they were going for. Like, I totally get what they were going for. The idea that Batman up until this point only saw Superman as an alien, and then when he finds out that he's got a mom, not only does he have a mom, but it's the same name as his mom. Like, I get that. Like, I get what they were going for. That moment didn't really hold up for me again, rewatch, though, because one, why would Superman, first off, why would he call his mom Martha? Why would he use the name Martha? Why would he just be like, they're going to kill my mom, right? So that was strange. But then, like, the idea that Batman was like literally about to kill him, and then Lois is like, that's his mom. He's like, oh, throws it away. He's like, we're bros now. I get what they were going for. I do get what they were going for. I felt like it a little choppy a little bit, you know, but like I understood the sentiment behind it, you know. So ultimately it didn't bother me that much, if that makes sense. What about you?
Yeah. For the most part, I'm on board with it. I think though this might fall into the category of like Jonathan and the Tornado. Like the execution probably could have been refined a little bit to make it, because I think, you know, people always make fun of I think the delivery of like why did you say that name? You know, like that whole thing. And I don't know, maybe they could have played it like a little bit differently, but you know, again, and you hit the nail on the head, right? Like the purpose behind it, the idea that after spending the entire movie calling him the enemy, the alien, like he finally sees him as a person, as a man. And the fact that they make use of this odd coincidence that their mothers both have the same name, that I actually like. So overall, like I'm on board with it. I agree that maybe there could have been like a couple other beats in that scene that kind of just let it play out a little bit differently. I mean, as to your point, like why did he say save Martha? I guess because in that moment, like he really thought like that was it for him. So it's like if he said save my mother, like, you know, Bruce wouldn't know who that is, I guess.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
But I mean, what the real reason is that they needed him to because they needed him to say Martha. So that's why he said Martha.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, like I agree. Like I think we're on the same page. Like the sentiment and what they were doing and the intent, I think, is totally valid and cool. And like I still understand it even through the execution of it. I don't love the execution of it, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me either.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things. It's exactly like the tornado scene for me, pretty much what you said, where like it's a little weird, but like it doesn't take me out of it, you know?
Yeah, and so like for people who think that, you know, who kind of get the message behind it, but think it was kind of goofy or whatever, like, all right, that's fair enough. But I don't know, for anyone who, cause I don't know, sometimes I feel like people think like it was just the coincidence of the name that like, you know, was the deciding factor for him. And it's like, no, it's like, it really is that he's finally seeing him as a person.
As like a human. Yeah. As someone that has like parents or thing. Yeah. And like, especially for him, the parents thing means so much to him because that's why Batman does it. Everything about Batman is because of that. Like his parents being ripped from him is what made him Batman, you know? He even says it almost before he kills him when he's like, my parents taught me a different lesson while they were dying in the gutter, you know? Which that line was great. That was a good, definitely like the most visceral like Batman like portrayal of that for sure.
That's the thing, man. And I've said this from the start because, you know, like I said, neither movie was exactly what I thought it was going to be, but always from the start with Batman v Superman, I loved this version of Batman. And I really just bought into the central conflict between the two of them. And it's so funny because I remember my wife and I saw Batman v Superman at Alamo Drafthouse, our go-to theater, and like they have their pre-movie reel. And they had a whole montage of all the times the Waynes get killed in TV shows and movies and all that. And I remember saying, I'm like, yeah, like how many times, I remember saying to her, I'm like, yeah, how many times do we have to watch these people get murdered? And then it's the first scene in the movie. But it's like, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, obviously it sets up the Martha bit, but like, you know, to go from that to Bruce's perspective on the battle for Metropolis, you know, from the, you know, his perspective on the events of Man of Steel, it's like, oh, like you see why he hates Superman so much, because seeing that battle made him feel just as powerless as he did when he was a kid and his parents were killed. And so it's like, if you trigger that in him, it's like, of course he's going to go after Superman. So like, I bought into that.
And they also put another layer on where that girl that he saves, he's like, where's your mom? And she like points to the building that's like, so it's like in his mind, Superman just made this kid an orphan, you know? So Superman's basically like responsible for this kid losing their parents, like in his mind. Like obviously we know as the audience that's not true, but that I bought that for sure. I bought that. I also think with Batman, like it's one of those things that he would never admit, but I kind of think there's this thing with Batman with Superman that I don't want to say jealousy, but I do think there's a part in the character that's slightly resentful for the fact that he doesn't have the power Superman has. You know, like a little bit, like not so much that would make him hate Superman, but the idea that he prides himself on the fact that he thinks he's better because he doesn't have all this stuff. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just reading into that. Maybe that's not the character at all. But I think in this movie for sure, I think that a little bit of that was in there.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of leads us to this, to Clark's journey in this movie. Because again, Batman's driving a lot of, like we said before, like there's a lot going on in this movie. Like Batman's driving a lot, and you're setting up Batman and Alfred and his whole quest. By the way, love this take on Alfred. I love that he's more of like a partner and a strategist, and like Bruce brings him coffee. I love that.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah.
But, so we're setting up, the whole Bat side of things. We're introducing Lex, we're introducing Kryptonite, we're teasing the other Justice League members. We get to Doomsday, we have Wonder Woman. Like there's so much going on.
I want to talk about the Justice League thing later on too.
Yeah.
Sure.
But like as far as Clark's journey in this, again, thematically, I thought it worked really well, and it was a nice payoff to the first movie, right? Where it's all these questions about like, how is the world going to receive him? And what you see in this is kind of a mix, right? Like some people see him as a god and they're like looking up and praying to him almost and worshiping him. But then you have others who are questioning his motives and doubting him and, considering him a political agent. And, obviously that fuels a lot of, Clark's inner doubt and conflict in this movie. And what I thought was really interesting, again, I don't mean to keep comparing it to the Donner movies, but that's I think it's natural. And certainly critics of Snyder's movies kind of always seem to want to go back to what Donner had in a lot of cases. In Superman 2, the whole crux of Superman's conflict in that movie was like whether to give up his powers to live a normal life with Lois, right? Which is, and I'm not passing judgment, but it's like a selfish choice, right? That he's wrestling with. In Batman v Superman, it's like he just wants to help people. And his conflict comes from people, doubting him and questioning his need to even be. So I just felt like, again, for anyone who kind of looks at these movies and thinks that it doesn't represent the core of the character, I mean, I think that it's there. I really think it's there. And it's like, yes, he's brooding a little bit more than you might want in a Superman movie, but I think it's justified in terms of the responses that he's getting.
But have you not read a bunch of comic books where he had that personality, where he was like wrestling with those same things? Like this thing, it felt like it was ripped right out of a comic book to me. Like, like a run. Like it felt like a story arc from a comic, as opposed to like the quote unquote status quo of Superman, which I keep coming back to. But it felt like he was telling like a specific story about it,
Yep.
But to your take though, I noticed this when I was watching it, how you said that the world was kind of divided on him. That, watching it now, that's not what I got. I got watching it now that most of the world loves Superman, and it was just a few asshole loud haters that were like getting in his head, which is kind of like, maybe it's just like how like Twitter culture and everything now, like people like would like fight with everyone and like people like very antagonistic or whatever. But I just got this sense that Superman was letting the haters get into his head a little too much, because it seemed like the average person that he was interacting with was like, thanks, Superman. Like, I don't know. And I liked how one of the talking heads in the movie, he said something like, we're trying to either make him like a god or a savior, but he's like, what if he's like none of that? He's just a guy trying to do the right thing. And I'm like, that's exactly what Superman is. Like the guy hit the nail on the head. He's just a dude trying to do the best he can with what he's got, like, yeah. And I think that his not so much self-doubt, but his like I'm looking for the right word here, but his frustration with everything, I think, was stemmed from that. Was that like some people are calling me like a god, and some people are calling me like a devil, and some people are like saying I'm all this stuff, but like I'm just trying to do the right thing, and I don't know how. Like I don't know how to do this any better than what I'm doing, and I'm trying, So right. That, I feel like that rang really true and was actually very relatable and metaphorical. I think even more so today,
That exactly. And well, so, I think there might be something to, your argument that, yeah, maybe, I don't know, like the general populace, like, yeah, maybe they weren't quite as split. I mean, I don't know. 'Cause like you had protesters at the Capitol when he went to testify,
true, yeah.
But like, again, is that representative of I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't know. It's hard to say exactly what the intent was in the movie. Like I definitely took it that people generally were kind of split, but I get what you're saying. And it might very well be that it was just like this, as we see in the real world, like this, like the vocal minority, you know, and it got into his head. But this larger point about, you know, cancel culture and, you know, everything like that, like, you know, especially when the talking heads in the movie are, you know, addressing that incident at the start of the movie when all those warlords were, you know, were killed. And of course, we know it was set up by Lex, but, you know, we have a witness who's claiming that, you know, it might have been Superman, and people are believing it. And it's like, how could people believe that? How could people spread these lies? You know, I mean, we live in a world now where like it's not always easy to get at the truth of what's happening. So that I feel like these movies have actually aged well. And I think, you know what? I'm going to go so far as to say I think these movies were a little bit ahead of their time. I think they would resonate a little bit more if they came out now. Because, I mean, we're talking now, what, 7 years, right? Since Man of Steel or something like that.
Man of Steel was 2013, yeah.
Yeah, right? And then at least, because then Batman v Superman was, what, 2015 or 2016?
Yeah.
You know, so it's been a few years. I really think that, well, like, especially in Batman v Superman, the reaction and everything, I think it would resonate a little bit more now.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually surprised with how like more like relatable I felt like a lot of it was, you know. Yeah. What did you think about this? Kind of ties into all that, but like, what did you think about Lex? The Lex part of all this, because like I feel like that kind of dovetails what we were just talking about. Dovetails into like the Lex kind of his portrayal and his motivations and all that.
So the last, all right. Oh, there's so much to talk about.
Okay, no.
No.
Do what you're saying.
I got it in my head. I'll come back. It's all right.
No. Lex is a big topic.
All right.
What you're say first.
No, I was just gonna say, like, as far as Clark doubting himself, the scene on the balcony in DC when, you know, Lois tries to talk to him and she points to the S and says, like, you know, this means hope. And he says, like, it did on my world, but my world is dead. And he flies away. Like, it breaks your heart. But then you get that great payoff at the end when he sacrifices himself. And before he does, he says, this is my world. You are my world. I love that bit. And, you know, we only get one scene of Pa Kent in Batman v Superman. And it's this vision or memory, I guess more vision, that Clark has of him. And I think my perspective on that has shifted a little bit too, where I think when I initially saw that scene, I just kind of took it as Pa saying, like, you're screwed no matter what you do, kid. And I think the heart of that kind of is still true, but this larger idea of like, you know, we diverted the water and we saved the farm, and like, you know, they called me a hero, but the Lang farm, like their horses drowned, right? So like someone was calling me a hero, but then someone else. But so like I feel like that. I don't know. I feel like that really drove home a lot of, you know, what Clark's internal struggle was in this movie in terms of how everyone was seeing him, and how sometimes you can do, like, your actions can be true. You can have the best of intentions, but you can be seen in different ways.
Yeah, the first time I saw that, I remember scratching my head, being like, "Huh," like not understanding at all what he was saying. But I think, looking at it a second time, to me, it felt more like you're not going to please everyone, but you should not try because of that. Like, knowing that you're not going to please everyone doesn't mean that you shouldn't still not try to do the right thing.
Right.
You know? So I don't know, maybe that's me reading too much into it, but that was the takeaway I got from it.
No, I think that's probably, you know, spot on. You know, I love that scene with them. And just one other thing with the extended cut, it really kills me that they cut this from the movie, but there's this whole sequence after the bomb goes off at the hearing, where in the extended cut you see Superman saving people, like, you know, and then he eventually flies away. But it really bugs me that they cut that, because I think that was a little missing in the theatrical cut.
Because in the theatrical cut, I think it was just him like standing in the fire, like.
I know.
Like, you know what I mean? And then it like cut to something else. So yeah, I do remember that in the theatrical cut being like kind of like, be like, what? Like Superman just kind of like chilling there, but
I know.
No, yeah, that was definitely good to have him in there. And then the cop he flies away because the EMT guy is like, get out of my way, I got this. You're just making more trouble. Like, did you notice that? That's the whole reason he leaves, is because, yeah.
I love how when he enters the courtroom, not courtroom, but you know, how gently he opens the little gate and closes it. It's like this being of infinite power, and he's so gentle with, you know, with that. But yeah, and that's the thing. Like when the bomb goes off, it's like you see the pain on his face. It's like he realizes in that moment, you know. And I like the way that was depicted, where he's just you know, he's fine, right, standing in the midst of, you know, of all that destruction. But all right, Lex. This is another instance. I feel like this is a whole theme in this episode where, again, my perspective has changed. As you and I have discussed many times, right? Like the Smallville versions of these characters are like seared into our brains. And in most instances, like that's kind of the standard that we, you know, measure anyone against. And so really, you know, for me, like Michael Rosenbaum is my favorite Lex. I love what he brought to the character. I thought he had the perfect balance of like charm, but also the ability to menace as well. I loved everything that he did. Going into Batman v Superman in my first couple of watches, I was kind of cold on Eisenberg, both the actor as well as the choices that he made in the movie. But again, I think with the passage of time, I know I like this version of Lex. And I think for a movie set in this time period, I think that's the right take on Lex. If Lex were real now, who would it be? It would be like a Zuckerberg.
Yeah, like I definitely like the new take on Lex. Like Laura reminded me when we were watching, she's like, you hated it the first time you saw it. And like, again, that was one of those things that the more I watch it, the more I like it. And I like his, like, and I actually liked his portrayal too, in the sense that he was quick talking, like he almost had like a nervous kind of tick going on. And he had that, like that cool guy startup kind of thing going with this basketball court in his office and everything. So like I thought it was a very modern take. It wasn't the one we're used to, which to me my default, like you're right, is still Michael Rosenbaum because he's cunning and smart and menacing, like all that. But as a different take, I thought this was like cool. Like I thought it was a cool take on the character, and it made sense for today's, like, you know, for the audience of today, because I don't think the Lex of today would be the John Byrne version. It would be someone more like this, you know. It'd be like a younger, cooler, quote unquote edgier, hipper kind of character, you know. So I think that it was good, and I liked it. I liked all the personality that it brought to it as well.
100%. And you know what I also really appreciated was it didn't fall into that same trope of Lex hating Superman just because he, you know, Lex feels that, you know, he's reached the pinnacle of achievement and then this other guy comes along, or that he's stealing the spotlight from Lex or anything like that. I felt like it was much deeper and philosophical and ideological, where, you know, that rooftop scene where he, you know, tells Superman he's kidnapped Martha, and, you know, he's, you know, setting Superman on a course to fight Batman. And, you know, we see that so much of this stems from the abuse that he suffered at the hands of his father, and the realization as a child, as he was being, you know, beaten or who knows what, that, you know, if God is all powerful, then he can't be all good. And if God is, you know, all good, then he can't be all powerful. And so I guess seeing people, at least some people, look at Superman as this all good, all powerful being was so antithetical to Lex that he had to take him down. I love that. I really, really like that a lot.
Yeah. And then also, was there something that they alluded to that, like, his dad was a kid in, like, Nazi Germany or something, and that there was the idea that, wasn't there that earlier, like, he said something that his dad had to, like, throw flowers in parades for fascists, and he said, and he wants to prevent, like, the kids of America having to do the same thing, because he thinks Superman might become this like fascist, like, ruler. That wasn't there, right? Like, I'm not.
I think so.
Yeah. It wasn't the typical Lex thing about, like, I'm jealous and I wish I was Superman kind of thing. It was a little deeper for sure. And I again, I don't think a lot of people got that in watching it. Like, it's definitely something you have to pick up on, because he speaks so fast and the delivery is so like nervous ticky almost, that you don't notice the details of what he's saying. But yeah, it was definitely a deeper portrayal, I think, than most people give it credit for.
Yeah. No, I've really come around on his version of Lex. Like, I, you know, like I keep saying, would it be my, like, you know, Desert Island like the only version of Lex that I could ever watch or read. It's like, no, but I really think it worked for, for this take. I thought it was cool. And then, I know we've been talking about, Batman, and you mentioned this before, like how he is obviously more violent and there are deaths as a result of, his actions in the movie. But, there too, it's like, that made sense to me. It's like the movie purposely gave us a Bruce at a very different point in his journey, than we typically see. And this is his whole arc, right? Like, he's so inspired by Superman and Superman's selfless sacrifice that he, comes around and then ultimately recruits the Justice League. So, you got to give him somewhere to go. So I like where they started him, where he's, as they say, cruel and, really hateful towards Superman, and, really kind of has that, that progression especially when he sees Superman's sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Totally agreed. Yeah, and also Batman killing in the movies is like nothing new. I think every Batman's killed in the movies. Like,
that's true.
So it's,
yeah.
It's maybe not the Nolans because that was such a crux of those movies, but
he just lets Ra's die in the first one. He's like, I don't have to save you, but
Yeah.
But it's true. He's not. But he didn't kill him. He just didn't save him.
Yeah, but the Keaton killed people left and right in those movies. So there's that.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, I don't know if that was so much a choice of Zack Snyder being Batman's going to kill people. It's going to be hardcore. I think it was just more like, let's have a great visually stimulating Batmobile chase. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I can separate that. You know what I mean? It is what it is. It looks great. The car.
Ken has been muted again. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, Ken, you're still muted. I think I don't know if there's an option there on your screen. If you touch the screen, maybe see if you get some stuff that comes up. Okay, let's see. We'll take a quick pause and we'll try to get this sorted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. All right, we're back.
Okay, sorry about that. I got the phone call again.
That's quite all right.
It's weird when a phone call comes in. It cuts our microphone. There's no button. I have to X out of everything.
All right. Well, this is a new platform that we're using, so we're working out the kinks. And again, we appreciate everyone bearing with us as we've been talking for about an hour and 40 minutes. So this has been quite the deep dive. But you're talking about the violence with Batman, and I share your view. I think that it and again, sort of going along with this more realistic take. It's like, yeah, I'm sure Snyder wants to provide a visually thrilling Batmobile chase and all of that, but it's like, yeah, in the course of something like that, you probably would have that sort of of damage, and especially if it's a Batman who's again, not quite as concerned with, with that sort of fallout. I think that's kind of what you get.
He doesn't really care anymore. He's a little jaded. He's like, this is what it is, the kind of thing, or that's the kind of Batman that he is at this point. So.
Yeah, I know you wanted to talk about the Justice Leaguers that we get that are obviously Wonder Woman plays a fairly significant role, especially in the final battle, but we also get teases of the other Justice Leaguers.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, Wonder Woman was awesome. Gal Gadot was perfect as Wonder Woman.
Yep.
She kicked so much ass in this movie. It was. I remember why everyone got so amped about her movie watching this, because it was like, yeah, she just showed up and stole the end of the movie totally. But yeah, the Flash I want to talk about. I totally forgot that in this movie he had like a ponytail and like a leather jacket. Did you remember that? Like,
Yeah,
it was such a visually different look. And now looking back, I wish they kept that for the Justice League. I wish they kept Snyder's like punk Flash, as opposed to like the like. I guess they were trying to make it more comic booky accurate in the movie, but like, I don't know, I kind of wish this one was Snyder's original take on them, and like, because I don't know, I thought, looking back, like, it would have been a much different take. I think what else, and then and then the scene when he shows up with the nightmare sequence. Yeah. What's your take on that? Because I have an idea about that. I want to know what your take is before I drop my bomb about what I think it is.
I mean, so like Snyder he's talked a lot, or it's a fairly decent amount, about what his original plans for Justice League were. Some of them he didn't even get to film because the studio got like real gun shy after the response to Batman v Superman, and he had to change certain elements from the script. But I believe like the original plan was that in Justice League, or one of the Justice League movies, Darkseid kills Lois, and distraught over her death, Superman succumbs to the anti-life equation. And that's where we end up with the Superman that we see in that nightmare sequence. And then it's up to Flash to go back in time to prevent all of this from happening. That's, I believe, what the original plan was.
Okay, because that's totally what I thought. I thought it was Superman taken over by the anti-life. But the idea that Bruce saw that, though, in my head, what I interpreted that as now was that, and knowing what you just said would actually line up with this theory, is that that's a reality that actually happened, that Barry Allen going back in time is setting the timeline. Because he went back in time, he reshifted the timeline, and so Bruce's mind is basically trying to reset. Like, remember in Flashpoint how his memories would have flash memories, he'd have memory flashes of like things from the other timeline that happened but now didn't happen, like his brain was like resetting. So that's what, watching it now, like, what if that would have tied in, like that was something that Bruce actually experienced, but now because he went back in time and changed it, it's a remnant of a memory that like is being jogged in his head.
Yeah, that's kind of, that's a cool theory. I like that. No, I dig that. Yeah. You know, it's like, and as far as the like the nightmare sequence and then like the video footage of the other Justice Leaguers, like at the time, I was kind of critical of that. I looked at it as a way of like short circuiting the world building process. Like they were trying to get to Justice League so fast, but I don't know. I think it works. You know, I don't really have like such an issue with that. And unfortunately now I seem to have my camera seems to have gone out. So, and then it's back. Okay.
There we go.
Boy, this is such a learning experience as we're doing this. But sorry, yeah, I kind of dug the teases of the Justice Leaguers. I thought they worked well enough.
Yeah, the teasers were cool. I thought it was a little weird. Their logos were on the computer flash drive.
Yes. Like Lex design. That? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, like like the Flash logo and the Aquaman A and everything. Like, I thought that was a little funny, but the teases were cool. Like seeing Aquaman, little tease, seeing Cyborg. I thought it was interesting that Cyborg's tease was like essentially his origin. Did you get that? Like,
yeah.
I thought that was kind of crazy that they did that. But yeah, no, I thought it was cool that they did that and threw it all in there.
Yeah. And then, it all culminates in the fight with Doomsday. And we went so far in this movie, like we got to the death of Superman, which I remember at the time I was like, I can't believe like they like, again, it was a lot of movie and they went really far, but I think, I don't think it was an accident that, he was born in Man of Steel. He dies in Batman v Superman, and then he's resurrected in Justice League. It's like, it really, completes that, the Christian arc, as Superman is so often compared to.
That's very true. As someone who's got a very, very tight connection to the death of Superman, like you do.
Yeah. What
did you think of their interpretation of basically the whole story and Doomsday and everything? Like,
at the time, I really kind of felt like it was, I don't want to say tacked on, but it felt like a bridge too far for me. It's like, I get that once Batman and Superman are able to work it out, like, I get why they felt, even just in terms of, I think there was a story reason, but I think even just in terms of spectacle, like the Batman-Superman fight, as cool as it was, and it really was brutal. Like, it was very violent. But as much of a spectacle as that was, I get why they felt like there needed to then be something else. I guess I just always felt like Doomsday was just like, again, it was just like an awful lot. But again, I like, especially now watching it, I think it like really all ties together and really, you know, completes this portion of Clark's journey. Like he had to reveal himself to the world. He had to wrestle with his role in the world and how people saw him. And ultimately, just like in the first movie, he placed his faith in people, right? And stepped forward and he took the chance that, you know, that faith would be rewarded essentially. And, you know, in this movie, as much as he's doubted, like he still makes that ultimate sacrifice for his world. So like I said, it's a lot, but I've kind of come around on it. And it's, you know, I mean, I don't know, like as far as the, let me turn this around and ask you, as far as the visual aspect of Doomsday, were you satisfied by it or did you find it was a bit lacking? Cause I wish they had gone like full on just comics accurate Doomsday.
I agree. And it actually was surprising because Zack Snyder is usually so visually on the mark with stuff that it felt weird that Doomsday didn't look like. I wish he had the chin bones and the mouth bones and the ponytail and the shoulder bones. Like there are elements of Doomsday that are so like iconic to like this, just the silhouette of like what he looks like, that I wish that they did that. But yeah, like visually I thought it was a little lacking, which is surprising because of all these movies, I think that's the only thing I think is visually lacking in these movies, you know? But yeah, knowing like what you were saying about he's born, dies, and is resurrected, getting those 3 beats in the 3 movies, it had to have been Doomsday. Like if it was Lex who killed him, like that would have been so like, no, there's a villain who's his whole claim to fame is that he killed Superman. So I get why they put him in. But yeah, I just wish he looked more like Doomsday, you know?
Yeah.
Just a little bit more. But and it was General Zod's body, right? That became Doomsday. That like I got that right?
Yeah.
It was like they mutated Zod's body. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
which I don't know if I got that. I don't know if I got that the first time I watched it, but it is clear. Like Lex goes into that chamber or whatever, and the mixture of his blood with Zod's body like mutates it. And creates that. So, I mean, look, as a fan, like you said, as someone with a close tie to Death of Superman, like, yeah, it was cool to see that brought to life. I do wish the look had been closer to the comics, but I wasn't like so put off by it. Mostly at the time, I was just, as much as they showed us Doomsday in the trailer, and maybe this was naive, but I was like, I don't think they'll go so far as doing the death. And I was just like, wow, I really can't believe they went that far. But again, I think it really did bring home like this portion of his journey. And I was very moved, just as I was moved in the first movie with, Jor-El and Lara sending him off, before Krypton exploded. I was similarly moved here when he made that sacrifice, and Lois's reaction, and, you know, Martha giving Lois the ring, and the dual funerals, you know, the way the world mourns their fallen soldier versus the way people who knew Clark say goodbye to him. That was all, I really did. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. Do you think that I agree? I agree with everything that you just said. And one of the things you just said got me thinking that they did show Doomsday and Wonder Woman in the trailers a lot toward the end.
Yeah.
Do you think the movie would have been better received had they not shown either of them in the trailers? Like if Wonder Woman and Doomsday were a complete surprise, like if you thought going into the movie that the climax was going to be Batman fighting Superman, do you think that the actual movie would have been better received?
Maybe. I do think they gave away too much. Like I really do think, especially like the Wonder Woman aspect, because like that helps sell the movie. So like from a marketing perspective, it's like, all right, like I get why you would want to highlight this, but Doomsday, I really feel like they could have kept that a secret, and they should have, because that's real deep. It happens so late into the movie, because you watch like the last trailer, it gives you the whole movie. I mean, like it gives you the whole arc of the movie. So I thought that was too much.
I think the last trailer showed the whole Batman warehouse scene almost too, like where he fights those guys. So that was, I get what you're saying about them having to show Wonder Woman to sell it, because I think it did sell it in a big way. But I think just Batman fighting Superman could have been enough to sell the movie. And then having people like having the word of mouth be like, holy crap, Wonder Woman was in it, like getting like the buzz from it, I think might have in the long run generated more than just slapping her onto that last trailer to like, you know, because it felt very, because I remember in the trailer, it was basically like they just showed that scene where she like drops down and the three of them are standing there, just ended on that, like with no explanation. So it was like, I think if they saved it, I think it would have done better. I really do.
You know what? I don't think, actually there might be something to that, especially for the word of mouth. Like if people came out of that being like, Wonder Woman was in that movie and she was awesome.
Yeah.
There might've been something to that. So we've been talking for almost 2 hours. I think we should probably,
Oh, wow.
we should probably wrap this up. But any other parting thoughts? Is there anything of these two movies that we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about? Because
I'm trying to think.
I know we jumped around a lot, and it was so much fun. I mean, I hope you had fun. I had a great time. But
oh yeah, I did too. I mean, I after watching these movies, it was weird because I knew they were long. So this is gonna sound like I'm doing like a dig on them, but it'll come around. Like because I was so busy the last 2 weeks, it was hard to find the time to watch them again. And like I was almost at one point, I started watching Man of Steel while I was working, while I was drawing, and I watched about maybe 10 minutes. I'm like, I can't do this. I just want to watch this because like I remember because I was almost not dreading watching them again. It's not the right word, but like because in my head like I felt like I knew them so well that like I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to like they're long. I'm gonna sit through them again. But when I actually sitting down and watching them again, it made me like them so much more than like what I had thought before. And I was so happy that I actually watched them. Like when I just didn't have them on the background, like I actually sat down and watched both of them because Man of Steel especially, dude, there's so much heart in that movie that I think people don't either just don't remember or they just didn't get the first time. If they only saw it one time or people told them it was bad and they never actually watched it, like these movies are much better, I think, than the general fandom wants to say they are. Like I think they're kind of a punching bag a little bit when they really shouldn't be, because I do think they're a very distinctive artistic vision from Zack Snyder, and it was just so apparent to me watching them again that. And I think I was telling Laura, one of the things I was telling Laura about this was that why I think maybe they did not resonate so much with people, like not resonate, but they were divisive, is that they were such an artistic take, right? Like from such a unique perspective that I think these superhero movies were almost conditioned for them to be these like 4-quadrant pleaser movies. And so going into it, your expectation, like what you're expecting and what you get is so like different that it kind of like jogs your system a little bit, And I think that might be why there was such like a kind of like a like blow, like people just kind of reeling back from them a little bit when they first saw them. But if you go into it, the idea that this was a unique vision and a unique take and just like a different look at the characters, I think you'll like them a lot more.
I couldn't have said it better. I mean, I agree with all of that. And I really think there's a lot to that. People, again, you see a lot of, because I looked up the reviews for, I think Man of Steel on Rotten Tomatoes after I rewatched it. And there were a lot saying like it doesn't have like a lot of charm, and I can't help but think like they're comparing it to the Donner movies or they're comparing it to the Marvel movies. And it's like, again, I think those are all perfectly valid takes. It's like, look, I enjoy the Marvel movies. They're a lot of fun. Half of them are comedies, really. They're action comedies. And that's great. Yeah. Like, I love that we can have a Thor Ragnarok. Wonderful. But that doesn't mean every movie has to be that, And so Snyder, like you said, he had a very distinct vision. And that's why, even as we anticipate a release date for the Snyder cut of Justice League, it's like, even if it's not your cup of tea, like that's fine. But I hope people, respect the fact that like as an artist, like he now has the ability to bring his vision to life. Like, you're an artist. As someone, like I make the documentaries and the podcast, it's like if I made a movie and like someone came along and like reshot more than half of it, and completely butchered what I intended for it, it's like, even if what I intended was worse, by whatever standard, it's like, it's like I would still at least want to be able to fulfill that vision. And so, again, if people don't like it, that's fine. But I very much, and I think that's why too, even though, and we shared some of our gripes and nitpicks with these movies. We're not saying they're perfect, but I think I'm able to be forgiving of certain things. Like, that tornado scene, some aspects of it don't totally sit right with me, but I get what they were going for. And I get that it wasn't, and I'm glad I wanted to bring this up. Like with Snyder especially, I truly get the sense that he's someone who cares about the characters, cares about the art, cares about the movies. And so, even if there's something that doesn't quite land like perfectly for me, it's like, I know that it was well-intentioned and there was a reason for it,
Yeah. Well, yeah, you could tell that this is not like a paycheck for him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this isn't like a guy just like banging out a movie like by formula to like just cash the check. Like, this is someone who like genuinely cares about what he's doing. And like, if the take doesn't jive with you, it doesn't jive with you. That's fine. Like, I mean, we're not here to tell people that you should like these movies. But another thing that I think, for me at least, helps is that like I know that when these movies are made, they're not the end all be all. This is what the character is going to be forever. You know what I mean? It's like, this is a take that is being done now. And like, we've seen in the past, there's different versions of Superman, different Batmans, different Spider-Mans, you know, there's different interpretations of all these characters. So I hope that people can go back and look at these and just look at them as that, as like, this was just an artistic take. To me, it's the difference between like a Dan Jurgens drawing Superman and Michael Turner drawing Superman, and Ed McGuinness drawing Superman. You know what I mean? It's like, they're all valid and they're all wildly different and they're all cool in their own way, you know? And that's kind of how I view these movies. Like, it's rare for me, any superhero movie, for me to be like, I hated this, you know, just because like I can always find something in there that is like, when they're done with like the artistic vision in mind, not the paycheck version that I was just saying, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the point in time where these things hit, and like, you know, look, this character's been around for 80 years. He'll be around forever. And it's like, there might come a point where we have confirmation of life on other planets, and the whole crux of his conflict in these movies, like, wouldn't really play anymore, right? Like, it wouldn't be a big deal to say, hey, I'm an alien. And then there's some other angle that they'll play. But I think for this point in time, I really, really enjoyed what these movies did. And I concur with you totally about the heart and the emotion that they have. And while it might be a darker tone in certain respects, that hope is still there. And you see it in the actions and the sacrifice that the character makes, whether it's controversial though it might be, whether it's the sacrifice of killing the last connection to his home world or giving his own life to save his adopted world. It's really there. There's so much there. And, you know, I suspect if someone hates the movies, they probably didn't listen or watch this. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
But like, but if for people who enjoyed it, hopefully they had fun with our conversation. And you know what, there might be some people who are kind of like mixed on it, and maybe now they'll rewatch the movies. And people have heard us as over the course of these 2 hours, right? Like, there's so much that we got out of our rewatches that we didn't necessarily get the first time around. So I do encourage other people to give it another watch, both movies.
Yeah, totally. And like, if people don't like them, that's cool too. You know, it's like, if you don't like them and you think they're still garbage and they're bastardizations of the characters, that's totally cool. That's like, you totally have the right to think that. And like, I don't feel like either of us are like saying you must like these movies. And we're just saying that we jive on like what Zack Snyder is trying to say. And like, we totally got it, you know? So, you know, it's cool. I do think okay, I want to ask you this. At what age do you think you're going to show Milo, your son, these movies? Because they're very clearly, when I watch them again, they're not meant for kids. Like, they are meant like 15 plus. Like they're meant for adults, you know? Like, so what do you think, like, when your movie order to show your son Superman movies, like, how do they fall?
I was thinking about that. That's a great question, because I really was thinking about that. And, you know, the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman is rated R. Like, it's an R-rated Superman movie. Yeah,
that's what made me think of it. Because when I played it, it came up, and I was like, "Whoa, this is crazy!" Like,
so I don't know. I mean, before he's a teen, I doubt it. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, we'll probably start with Smallville. I think we'll probably start. Well, we'll probably start with the animated series. We'll do the animated series from Bruce Timm. Then maybe we'll move into Smallville, and we'll do the Donner movies maybe in conjunction with that. And then when he's a little older, we'll do the Snyder ones. I think that's a fair progression.
Okay. Yeah. Are you gonna just skip over Superman Returns? Just nice.
No, I think we'll include that along with the Donner movies.
Oh, the Donner ones, yeah. So teenager, because I was thinking the same thing, like, because with Laura, when we were talking about when we have kids, like, when are we gonna, like, because there's so much stuff that, like, not just like Superman or the like video games and stuff that, like, it'd be like fun to pass this along, but it's like some of the stuff is like, you definitely got to be of a certain age to like understand like any of the stuff, you know, like the action or the fighting or anything. So
I know.
Yeah.
Like I said, though, be prepared to weep during the Jor-El and Pa Kent scenes. It really just hits you in a different way. And you know what? And I don't look, I'm confident in my masculinity. I'm happy to say that. And it's funny enough, well, a friend of mine from law school, I guess maybe he saw me post that I was rewatching these movies, but he messaged me and he was like, yeah, I cried during like a lot of these scenes in Man of Steel. So like other people are having these types of reactions too. And for him too, like the father-son stuff, like really hit home. So, you know, it's something that, yeah, when Milo's old enough, if he has the interest, you know, I would love to show him these movies and revisit them again. And who knows what I'll find, you know, new to enjoy about them then.
Nice.
Listen, short of Zack Snyder himself, man, there's no one else that I would have wanted to have this conversation with, because you and I have been talking about this for years, and there's, as much as like, you know, we initially bonded over Superman generally, but Smallville specifically, but like with these Snyder movies, you know, there are some folks out there who were like true disciples of Snyder who think he's like, you know, God's gift to cinema, and they're like fully in. Then you have like the army of detractors. And then, you know, people maybe who fall somewhere in between, but like to find someone who enjoys the movies and can kind of speak the same language about them. I always enjoy whenever we get to talk about it. And like, it's so awesome to me that on both video and audio, we've captured a 2-hour conversation about this. It's so much fun.
Yeah, totally, dude. Like I had so much fun talking about this, and like, again, talking with you about all the Superman stuff is fun, but like again, I feel like we're kindred spirits when it comes to so much of our fandom. Like I think it's funny, like there's so much that like we're like simpatico with like the stuff that we like. So yeah.
So listen, thank you, Ken, so much for being part of this episode. So we've not heard the last from you on Digging for Kryptonite, not by a long shot. And actually today, the same day that this episode that you've just listened to is out, Ken and I also have an episode of Digging Deeper, the official Patreon exclusive companion podcast, where we talk about Justice League, the theatrical version of Justice League. And it's a great episode. Actually, I don't know, because we haven't recorded it yet, but I think if it's anything like this, it'll be great. So if you want to hear Ken and I talk about the theatrical Justice League, head on over to patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. It's available at all levels, $1 and up. And then Ken's going to be back. You know, we don't have a release date yet for the Snyder cut of Justice League, but once that's out, we're going to watch it, and we're going to have you back on the show, and we're going to talk about it. And I think we're going to have an awful lot to dissect when that happens. Yeah,
man, I'm excited. I'm really, really excited to see the differences between the theatrical and the new take, and just it'll be fun for sure.
For sure. Well, Ken, thank you so much, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you. Awesome. And thank you so much to everyone for listening or watching. This was actually our first video podcast, which is very exciting. But thank you for everyone who consumed this episode, however you consumed it. It's been such a blast doing this podcast. I can't wait to keep doing more episodes. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Art by Greg Schiegel, music by Basic Printer. If you like what you heard, be sure to listen to My Comic Shop History, available on most major podcast platforms. Sign up for exclusive additional content, including the Digging for Kryptonite companion podcast, at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato, and watch my documentary film, My Comic Shop Country, out now on Apple TV and Amazon.